So we now got the panel discussion. We'll be wrapping up basically any other issues, questions, concerns that have come up through today. So I'm not going to bother with introductions, as you've had introductions already for all the panelists. What I'm going to do is kick off with a question that really came from the discussion around WAP Push. Because I remember when I first experienced it, and it was all about the user experience. It was terrible. I get this message, it popped up, and then I couldn't find it on my, I think it was a Nokia 6310i was the phone I first experienced it on, and I couldn't find where the message had gone. It wasn't in my messages, and it was like, that's the most obvious place for it to be. It was hidden away somewhere else, and I think it's all about the user experience. And it's more than that as well, because part of what we've been discussing is, does OMA need to focus on trying to create some kind of standardization around rich media messaging? And when I look out there today, there's actually some great over-the-top solutions. Not over-the-top services, but if we look at the package of capabilities that Urban Airship provides, they basically have the infrastructure, so across your BlackBerry, your Android, your Apple phones, as a app developer, as a content, as an advertiser, I can push messages, and I can design them with a tool that is so easy. HTML, WebKit, I can create great experiences for vouchers, for adverts, you name it. So, but that, of course, is working basically as an aggregator atop of these silos. So I'm just interested, and I just open it up to the panel here, on your perspectives on, is there a role for OMA to try and create something that works outside of those silos? Does it make sense, or should we basically just rely on aggregators to solve the problem? Go for it. Just dive in.
Okay, thanks. Well, I think my perspective is that when you want to create something that works best, it's best to make it as simple as possible. And if you want it to be simple, then you need to keep the number of boxes that you've got to a minimum. And as soon as you've got some kind of box in the middle that's kind of aggregation box, that kind of breaks the end-to-end protocol. And then it doesn't always work properly. So we've seen the original SMS concept was that you had two MSCs in the way, one CCITT number 7 signaling pipe, and boof, off the message goes. And actually, if all you have is those boxes, SMS works really, really well, unless there's congestion on the radio. As soon as you start to introduce an aggregator box, the end-to-end delivery report facility that was designed into SMS breaks. Sometimes these IP-based boxes don't work on the same time frames as the C7 boxes, and sometimes something goes wrong. Sometimes you have boxes which route messages to places where it's not the mainstream. So you have an SMS aggregator box that sends messages from country A to country B, and unless somebody during that time when it's down notices it, complains to the operator, unless enough people complain, then nobody notices that the box has actually gone down. And so a user has a lousy experience, but because it's only one user, you don't get the feedback. Whereas if, let's say, Facebook goes down, you've got millions of users immediately complaining. So for me, the best way to handle rich media messaging in the future is to have the most simple end-to-end design that's possible. And for me, the way that Brian described the W3C real-time web, that actually seems to be the most simple way to do it, and probably I think that will succeed. So I think in terms of does OMA need to create rich media messaging, I think OMA needs to look into what facilities we have now and how we can build on what the W3C is doing to make a simple rich media solution.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that at all, actually. I think that taking WebRTC as a starting point, there will need to be some way that it interoperates with legacy systems. I also think that there might be some scope for capabilities around messaging that don't tread on anyone else's toes or get too complicated to deploy in a multi-OS, PowerFlow EM, PowerFlow TT environment. But maybe something around privacy control, privacy solutions talked about a couple of times today. So I'm wondering if there's a way of standardising on-device privacy, although saying that fast happens might be fun. But on the other hand, it could perhaps more have customer acceptance. Some sort of mechanism for dealing or signifying charging or differential charging for messages, particularly international ones. Yeah, it's still pretty ridiculous. If I want to send an SMS here to someone in the UK, it's going to cost me whatever 50, 60 cents, which almost gets worth to the point where it's after I only have to send about 5 messages, and I might as well just buy a local SIM card.
No, good point.
The other point I wanted to bring up is when you talked about user experience, and I know I was talking about brands and SMS, but really the move towards like SMS to pop up rich media, like pop-up videos, et cetera. There's a lot of companies really striving in that space, and for media players, et cetera, that's what they want. They want that SMS to just pop, and you see those, 10 seconds of a film, and then you're going to want it. So I really do see a big market there.
Brian and guys?
Yeah, a couple of things. So I think the start of your question was pointing out that the UI effectiveness is a key consideration, right? And to that last point, a consistent user experience with regard to alerts and how you interact with the messages is very important. OMA has never gone there to specify really user experience. That was one of the problems that we had, obviously, with the original days of push, going to the browser inbox and not being able to find it. I know exactly which Nokia phone you're talking about. The problem is that things do change over time, and things are actually much better now. So if you go and look in your Android phone, you'll find that these messages do go into more or less the common inbox in many cases. Operators have gone a long way toward promoting the development of common inboxes for all types of messaging, and so some of those perspectives that occurred in feature phones may not still be valid. But I think, and that's something why we should consider these standardized enablers now, in addition to the non-standardized enablers like Apple and Google, et cetera. But on the question of the boxes, the number of boxes, as Kevin said, in the path, that there's a pivot point here between aggregation and consistent, widely deployed standards. If you don't have consistent, widely deployed standards, you must have an aggregator. Otherwise, it's not scalable for the developer. The reason that Urban Airship and Open Market probably are successful in what they do is that they do provide a single interface. Now, it may be different between them two, right? But it's a single interface for those developers. And unfortunately, we have not been in the operator community as successful in consistently, universally deploying APIs, and they have come in basically and rightfully so, taken a place in the market that needs help. Through one API, through the stuff we've done in OMA, we've defined RESTful versions of the APIs, but it's up to the operator community to actually deploy them. And so one of the things that we're looking at OMA is how does a developer access and discover the types of APIs that are available and access them in as simple as way as possible, because that's the only thing that's going to really promote use of those services.
Yeah, because I think what you're highlighting there, Brian, is a key point. The Urban Airship isn't an API. It's a service, and it's a great business proposition as well. It's not a penny a dip, which is basically the one API pitch. Here's our API. It's a penny a dip. Thank you and goodbye. It's a broader proposition where actually it's free, until you start actually using a significant volume, and then you basically buy quite a reasonable package of messages. So I think the API is, I think, an important piece, but we're stumbling as an industry on, and I don't know whether this is guidelines or something somebody needs to basically help the operators in terms of implementing. Because if we look at, so I gave you Urban Airship, another example is Twilio. Twilio just basically packages up calling and messaging. bread and butter for operators. But it's not the API. The API is down in the noise. What Twilio does is it has a whole set of how-tos. It has a simple description with a few lines of code of how to build up your own call center, how to build your own PBX, how to do your own call tracking, how to run your own inbound to outbound marketing campaign. All there presented in a simple, easy to consume form. Hence, Netflix built its own call center. So there's, I guess I sort of resonate with what Dean's saying in a way, but maybe not as strongly, that standards are irrelevant. I think standards have, in a way, the technology's become commoditized, and the hard bit, the bit we're stumbling at the moment, that whether it's standardization guidance or something, is on the business models, the go-to-market, and experience, customer experience, customer experience, customer experience. I mean, that's what any basically service capability lives or dies by.
Is it design in its broadest sense?
Yeah.
I mean, everyone thinks design is, it's graphic design, it's putting things, sort of desktop publishing glorified. But actually, when you speak to sort of Frog or Fjord or some of the design agencies, it's much more broad than that. It's understanding the whole interaction of a user with a service. What is it? What is the purpose of it? What's the whole? I don't like marketing terms like journey any more than I suspect most people do. But the point is that we've got to a stage where phones are sufficiently smart and capable that pretty much you can do anything that you can imagine. And so therefore the premium goes on people doing the imagining rather than the doing. And that's where the value is.
Yeah, I agree.
I just one other comment on the point that do we need standards for certain things? I mean, certainly for certain things we don't need more standards to replace the standards we already have. What we need is execution on what we have.
Yeah. No, I agree. So do we have any questions from the audience? We've covered a lot. We've had a lot of controversial statements. I tried to wake you up before lunch by basically saying that the operators at customer service sucks. Your activities and APIs suck.
And what's the customer service for APIs?
Oh no!
I mean, because I spoke to an operator last year talking about sort of that was more about selling QoS as a capability, and they said, well, it sounds great in principle. Let's assume the technology works. We've got two problems we see. We don't know how to sell it, and they don't know how to buy it, which I thought was quite a deep and profound comment.
Yeah, and actually to the quality of service API, I mean, I was having a discussion with some of the demoers earlier today. It's been so badly mismanaged. It's almost like, hey, we're in the middle, we're a tax. Yes, you paid your CDN provider, the customer's paid, but we're going to tax you again. And when you talk to Netflix, Hulu, video, all these over-the-top video guys, it's almost hatred at the concept of quality of service. So there are some APIs actually I feel that it's been so badly managed from a PR perspective that actually you've got to make your own dog food. And that's to an extent on the Open API, Telco API discussion group on LinkedIn. That was one of the points that I sort of raised is what has been specified for the OMA RCS APIs. Is it really more for internal consumption? So operators internally for operator partners and not necessarily for independent third parties. So I'm just interested in your perspective on the RCS APIs. Kevin, Brian, any comment?
Yeah, I think to some extent we're a victim of our own membership. And OMA has been trying in the last few months, I would say, to identify how do we get closer to developers? How do we encourage more membership from those developer-type organizations? And if we were successful in doing that, we'd be able to get the right perspectives into the group. And one of the reasons for having external speakers in this day today was to gain different perspectives from those already in the OMA mindset. Now, I think the issues that you've outlined with the RCS APIs are probably because of who's been in the room designing them. rather than because we've made a terrible mistake and it's all rubbish. I think they are very good and they do deliver some things. I think we could do better, but we need to find a way to attract and retain membership from developer-type people to be able to improve on what we're already doing.
Can I make one possible suggestion there of developer constituencies? Could well be, for large operating groups, their individual in-country opcos, which might have slightly different requirements and therefore need the customization capability. Or indeed their internal IT folk, and actually using RCS for their own employee services, or can you use RCS for customer service outbound to end users? So you haven't got to even worry about interoperability. It's between the Orange call center and Orange subscribers. That would be a case in point where you've got the dog food.
Exactly.
Example.
I think that's critical.
Yeah, on the point about your earlier comment about the APIs, I think we can say that developers either don't know about the APIs that most mobile network operators offer, right? They probably would be unhappy about the inconsistency of the whole process. This is why when I show this onion, right, of the web ecosystem, right, the things that are in that enablement layer of between the APIs, the tech specs, and between the services, right? How do you publicize what you have available? How do you get the developer mind share? How do you give them the documentation they need? How do you give them the tools, the tool chain support they need? How do you onboard them consistently? How do you ensure that the APIs work consistently across the world? Right? These are really the big stumbling blocks. And that is why people have a poor view of the APIs. I mean, we've got APIs designed according to RESTful practices, which are the standard of design pattern for APIs. Actually, the current standard. But the fact is, we're still maybe at the early stage of getting up to speed on these things because, for example, AT&T, we just launched our API platform in the last year. We have an opportunity, and those are the things we have to solve. Basically, it's those fulfillment, that whole developer support life cycle that we really need to work on.
Because it's segment, because we use the word developer, and actually there's as many developers as there are people on the planet. One way to reach them, which I know quite a few operators are doing, is there are existing well-established developer communities. Because it's, to be honest with you, and it's a word you used, Dean, cool. To be an AT&T developer or a Verizon developer isn't cool. To be a Google developer, to be a Roku developer, to be one of the over-the-top, that's cool, it has credibility. And the great thing is, let's face it, if you're building on Apple, on iPhone or on Android, you're accessing a relatively engaged market of over 550 million devices. That's where the momentum's going. Let's face it, Microsoft can't even attract developers simply because they look at it, it's like, guys, even though you're exactly the same terms and conditions and you're Microsoft and we know you and we hate you, we don't see the relevance because you're not big enough. And they've got clear quantified numbers across basically the Microsoft platform. And part of the challenge we see with operators, apart from business model, not understand, because I see a challenge that there's this discussion, we've got to onboard. And it's like, no, actually, you will never get a AT&T developer unless they're selling stuff through your app store. Or you can do something which is terrible, which is basically put a whole host of bloatware on your phone because nobody's using your app store anymore, and that drives actually terrible user ratings. If you look at, go to Google Play, look at the Verizon Navigator app, which is bundled on Verizon phones, and just see all the 1 ratings. And people just going bloatware, 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 bloatware. So again, I think that there's partially, again, it's the whole business model and understanding that APIs have relevance both internally, which I think actually should have been the focus initially, and then to different segments. Actually, a big segment are your existing partners. Another one, enterprise customers. Actually, chasing the long tail, I'd argue, it's not worth it. It's not in your best interest.
Another one is other telcos.
Yep.
There's no reason why there could not be a Argentinian operator providing an API to T-Mobile, Bobsnet for that matter,
Absolutely.
or a Russian one to Telefonica to me.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that in fact, if there isn't transparency and openness about APIs when dealing with notional competitors from elsewhere in the telecoms industry, I think there's be some regulatory issues anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, I think the point you made about the 550 million devices is actually a really, really important point, because if you think about in the old days, you'd have a fixed telco you'd have one fixed telco in one country, and they would control everything that went into and out of their network. They would control the design of the network. The people who built it had to build it to that operator spec, and there was one market, and it was all very clear. But they had the entire market for that country. And then when we look at SMS, we had this multiple operators, and they didn't have interconnect, and the market size wasn't big enough. So then we had to have interconnectivity within one country, and then the market size was big enough. But now we've got to a point where we've got this massive supranational, international companies that are selling massive numbers of devices, and individual operators or even massive operator groups like Vodafone cannot really compete in that space. So I think we have an important point to think about there, that people are migrating towards where there is a massive market, and that is an issue for operators.
Yeah. Much.
Yeah, and I do a lot of work internationally, so I think that's the key when you look at some place like Brazil, where it's just absolutely booming, and you have this, again, there were less fixed lines in Brazil, so they almost skipped a step and quickly adopted wireless services. But you start to see also where all these large telcos try to get into Brazil, but they can't because, again, there's already entrenchment in there, there's already systems that work, and at the end of the day, I think one of the biggest challenges we have as an industry is consumers expect a lot from their phone. And we never sit back and say, hey, we already do a lot, hey, we have to do even more. But if you really think of how much people expect from their phones, because if you can't pull that email up when BlackBerry goes down for 2 hours, people go crazy. So, I mean, we have a really strong reliance. So addressing all these issues are so crucial, and doing it in a timely manner is also very crucial. So I think what Oma's doing in creating these, again, yeah, you say you've only been really hitting it for 2 months. Well, guess what? You're like ahead of every other operator who's been trying to solve these things for years and years. And this is when collaboration really does help the industry.
I think the them and us attitude doesn't help either. I think this, and I've picked it up through today, there's this attitude that the telecom operators somehow are higher quality, more attuned to customers, more attuned to privacy, a whole bunch of things. And in some ways they are, in some ways they're not. I mean, I've had 2 spam SMSs from Vodafone, my operator, while I've been here, trying to sell me stuff like travel services and all sorts of other nonsense. I've never once had a spam SMS from Facebook or Google. And so I think that getting rid of that them and us and attitude, and actually realizing that certainly in areas where there are incumbents, say social networking, work with rather than try and confront face to face. And all this idea of, we'll take all the information, we'll front end Facebook, we'll put a UI or unified messaging thing in front of Facebook. That's the wrong way around. You should start off being inside Facebook, like Zynga did. And then if you get sufficient scale, then you become a platform in your own right. You don't assume platform status with a user base of 0 or something.
But would you buy a Facebook phone? Facebook comes out branded phone. Would you be? Cause,
they already exist. I mean, there's 2 or 3.
But would you buy? Because ESPN was an MVNO, Disney was, and they had all these issues as brands going out trying to become mobile companies.
No, I'm not suggesting that. But I'm thinking that having an RCS style app inside Facebook, depending on what Facebook's developer rules are, would be a starting point, and then over time, if you did what Zynga did with Farmville and all the other things and get 200, 300 million users, you earn the right to have that as a separate entity on its own.
Yeah, bootstrap. Exactly. Well, if we don't have any other questions, Fred, you two, there you go.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. You just mentioned in passing the enterprise. I just wondered if it might be worth spending a couple of minutes talking about the enterprise part of the market. Dean was sort of challenging us with that we don't really need any interoperability or any further interoperability. I think, Alan, you mentioned the idea of national interoperability at least was very important. But I think maybe in the enterprise area it's a little bit different. For the big multinationals, you need some global interoperability. You probably need integration of messaging systems with other Office systems. So it seems to me there is some opportunity, at least in that area, to do some more standardization and to sort of lift up the sort of functionality that's interoperable. But perhaps the panelists would care to comment on that.
I've just been busy working on a project talking to a whole range of verticals. I just give you from financial services. There's a company called Pivot. What they do is they build basically a front end onto a couple of popular IM platforms that actually brokers use. So you've got trades of billions of dollars basically passing through Yahoo IM and AOL IM. And what they do is basically they put a front end on it, so it basically meets the needs of that of the brokers. Also, because basically they can send out messages to like basically 60 contacts. They also have different rate limiting rules, so they've done the back end deals with AOL Yahoo. And for them, one of the big issues is we'd really like to have the identity work so that it's not just the IM, it's linked to the phone identity. Because when send that message out and that broker isn't on their IM, that message needs to get through because they need to respond yes or no. Because all the big basic banks, they're basically firing people left and right, and they want the existing basically traders they've got to do more and more and more. So they want them basically trading while they're on the toilet. They want them trading while they're at lunch. And basically when that request comes through, within basically if they're not present, there's an SMS sent through. If they're not responding to that SMS within 10 seconds, there's a call going through. So that trader is forced to respond on whatever device. So aggregating basically messaging, aggregating identity, there's definitely tons of opportunity. The whole sort of Microsoft Link that's getting rolled out in a lot of enterprise is making it even more painful. So I think there are opportunities, whether it's standardization. I really sort of, what both Brian and Kevin have, indicated, we've got enough standards. It's how it's all packaged together. I think that's the challenge that we've got in packaging it in meaningful ways that does enable interoperability. Now I say national because I just get frustrated by basically one operator group announcing something that's completely useless because it's basically for most customers a third of the contact list have access to it. That's why I say focus on the country, at least you can basically see if it works or not. But absolutely, in the limit it should be basically across the planet. Hand over to anybody else.
I'll agree with you because even between Apple and BlackBerry, I'll calendar things. I have a committee that has 28 members on it. I'll calendar it on my BlackBerry. Half the people will say, "Oh, I just got this weird little message that you sent me something. What did you send me?" That's a simple thing. I'm like, can't you fix the calendaring between BlackBerry and Apple? And it's ridiculous that you can't. And that's why a lot of the federal government's like, no, we're not going to do Apple, we're going to do BlackBerry. It's like we have to be consistent across the board, whichever enterprise system we use, and it has to be compatible with BlackBerry and Microsoft Office, etc. So on the enterprise level, you do see those compatibility issues are huge.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd say on enterprise, there's three different spheres here. One is employee-to-employee communication. One is company-to-company, for example, broker to fund manager. And the third is business to consumer for customer service and support. I would say of those three, the last one, business to consumer, is probably where there is the largest potential for full interoperability. I think it's the sort of thing, your bank may not be on the same social network as you are, and absolutely that siloed approach doesn't work. Although if you have the bank's app, it could well have integral messaging inside it. Now whether they want to administer that or perhaps use it as an API from a third party is going to vary. I think employee to employee, it tends to be more of a monoculture. So you may have the entire workforce on BlackBerry. Now it gets more complicated with bring your own device, but then bring your own device also implies bring your own service provider as well, which then seems to suggest some sort of OTT app even then. Yeah. And the last one is company to company. I'm not sure on that one, to be honest.
Cool. No, that's great. Okay. And then we had one final question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Stig Ove, TeliaSonera. Listening to all this fragmentation, things that doesn't work together, I mean, I think to some degree, I think we have to remember one thing about how the whole business actually have evolved, and that is, I mean, if the users today don't get the roaming capability wherever they are in the world, they get very, very disappointed. So here we have the operators basically in the bottom, securing that you have these roaming capabilities. When we're talking about this, okay, different kind of APIs, apps, different functionalities or whatever, I mean, the question comes automatically. What is the responsibility? Who has the responsibility for actually securing that these services works? Thank you. That's my question.
I mean, I guess it's who's the first call you make. It always goes back to if your phone doesn't work, you call your operator. So I think that's why a lot of the liability always seems to rely on the operator, whether or not it's their fault. That just seems that from a consumer side, that's where we put the liability. But you've asked a great question.
Well, I'll give you an example with Rogers, because they've been moving all their premium SMS partners over to a payment API. Because what that's enabled them to do is on your bill, you get the line item, the description of what you bought, rather than just a number and a $1.99 or $4.99 charge. So you've got the item, you've also got the name of the company, and the customer service number to call. Because you bought it from that company, it's their basically issue. So to an extent, it's up to the operator to basically sort of, in that scenario, to basically, I mean, it's partially the business model, but the key is operators do need to get far more smart in having basically better self-help on the phone when you have service problems. And in that self-help, you make it clear, this app has nothing to do with us. Here's the number. Because actually most of the apps don't have any numbers. They don't have any, it's difficult to find out. If the operator basically wants to save millions in call center costs, you make it easy. You make an easy button for basically fault finding.
I think you're right. I think operators do need to get a bit smarter in terms of supporting customers who are roaming, because otherwise they're going to vote with their feet. Yeah. I mean, how many people get into a situation where they're roaming, the phone doesn't quite work, and they think, well, I'm not going to spend a lot of money calling back home to an operator waiting on hold. What I'm going to do is just going to use Wi-Fi. So people will just vote with their feet and go to Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I think that's a significant risk. I mean, given how long it's taken to get even SMS to work properly when roaming, and knowing that it's worked, do we really think it's going to get any easier with roaming scenarios for richer forms of messaging, which might include text and image and file transfer and all the rest of it, and trying to resolve the bill queries afterwards? Where, you did actually upload that 3 meg photo when you were in Bolivia over LTE, and it cost you, $37. I don't want to be the customer service agent having to deal with that, and the piece of software, OSS software, that I've got to try and give me the answer.
But I think as an industry, roaming charges need to change. They're ridiculous. I mean, I travel internationally all the time. I basically buy from my service provider. They have this nice package where for $20 I can buy basically, I can't remember, it ends up being like sort of 10, 20 cents per message while roaming. And I use that. I would never call. Especially, imagine in China. I call to basically tell the person that I've arrived. Well, it takes us like a couple of minutes, first of all, to realize I've called the right person, to basically they say, why are you calling me? So like 5 minutes on and I've spent like $10. Well, for basically 20 cents, I'm down in the lobby. I mean, that's how you get around it, and then you use Wi-Fi everywhere. Because simply the roaming charges for data are just ridiculous. If not, then what I'd suggest is we sort of bring this panel session to a close. I think that really what struck home in what Kevin was highlighting when I was asking around sort of rich media messaging, and he was highlighting the fact that looking at some of the existing standards like what WebRTC delivers and how that can be with a simple set of guidelines to enable, I think, a whole range of sort of rich messaging capabilities that have the potential to be interoperable, I think is an interesting avenue. So I think definitely kudos to Kevin for highlighting that as a way forward. But thank you so much for all your time today, and let's thank the panel for an excellent discussion. And that's it. We're off home.
Okay, thank you. I think I just ought to wrap up the workshop in general. I think we've had a very interesting and useful day. We've had some good presentations on the work that's being done inside OMA and how that's being used to launch RCS services. We've had more information on what's happening with HTML5 and the real-time web. We've looked at a number of different deployments from different vendors. We've discussed the over-the-top messaging scenarios and what the landscape is. We've looked at messaging as a content delivery channel. We've looked at emergency messaging and aggregators. We've looked at what are the sources of value in messaging and what drives people to do messaging. And then finally, we wrapped it up with a panel. So I think we've had a very useful day, and we've had a lot of food for thought for OMA. And the important thing to take away is that OMA needs to do some more work and think about how we deliver our enablers to make a success of this industry for messaging. So with that, thank you very much for your participation, and see you all soon.